Welcome to SHiFT YRC Podcast, a podcast developed by young and early career researchers of SHiFT Cost Action. For more information about SHiFT, please take a look at details in the channel description. I'm Carlos Alves, and I'm here with my colleague Silvia Chiarini. In each episode, we sit down with a special guest from our SHiFT community to uncover their journey, their challenges, and insights that are shaping the world of research. Today, we are thrilled to welcome Aet Annist. Aet Annist, it's such a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So, welcome again, Professor. And let's start at the beginning of your journey. So, can you tell us a bit about your academic background and career journey so far? And maybe a specific moment or experience that sparked your interest in your specialization?
Yeah, I studied sociology, in fact, in the beginning in Estonia as my first degree. And also I did my first MA in sociology. And my main interest was young people, in fact, and subcultures in particular, and how these groups, both young people as well as subcultures, how they are represented in the media. And also in the society and in the academic world, what kind of theories are developed about young people and subcultures as a kind of a phenomenon or as a group. And one of the features that I found quite interesting was how the younger year groups up until a certain point, how they are seen to be still in this kind of in this developed form, how they can be shaped, how they're seen to be shapeable by society and also in need of being shaped, how society sort of wants to shape them, wants to develop them, and also how it sort of sees them in a way as a problem, how young people, especially in the media, often come into the picture when they are a problem, when they are either involved in crime or their subcultural sort of expressions are in some way seen as an issue for the society, but also in some way as an exotic phenomenon. So subcultures is a very exotic example, but generally how youth has some kind of different way of seeing or reading the society. So they would be coming into the picture when they have a critique towards the society and so on. So this was something I was quite interested in. And during my my master's in sociology, which I partly took in Helsinki in Finland, I became increasingly interested in anthropology, and particularly because, just like young people, certain societies that anthropology has been studying are similarly, like traditionally studied. Admittedly, anthropology nowadays is looking at a very different kind of list of subjects to study. But classical anthropology has been looking at exotic societies, exotic cultures, but also these other cultures are something that the Western world, where these academics come from, how it sees these other societies as something to be developed, as a problem, as not having reached yet the level of development that the West has. So in some ways, there are some interesting parallels, and my master's was in fact sort of comparing these theoretical representations in anthropology of these exotic cultures, and on the other hand, how the societies are presenting young people in somewhat similar terms. So there was a lot of interesting comparisons to be made. So that was something that really put anthropology at the very center of my study, even though my own empirical work was in fact very sociological. It was sort of using sociological methods, and I was gathering my data from Estonian newspapers to understand how young people are represented. So I finished my master's in Estonia, and because of my interest in anthropology, I decided that I need to go abroad. I was considering to go to Finland, but in the end, to do my PhD. But then in the end, I actually did another master's in Cambridge in the UK, because in Estonia there was no anthropology at the time, and partly for personal reasons. In the end, I went to the UK, and after that master's there, I moved on to have an even closer look at how this othering is happening through institutional means. So I was actually looking at development industry. I was sort of looking increasingly at how these othering processes are taking place on the kind of development industry level. How the Western institutions enter the developing societies? How do they try to bring on changes there? How do they want to shape these other societies, because they are seen to be somehow developmentally not quite there yet from the point of view of Western economic or technological or whatever other development. And of course, at the bottom of this, there is colonial practices and this kind of idea that the Western world is somehow supreme, somehow better. But also, since the processes of decolonization, it's kind of been taken over by this development industry, these development institutions, which have developed their own discourses and practices to allow to develop these far away societies with very different background and very different aims. So anyway, to understand that, I did my PhD again in the UK at University College London. And because it was anthropology, I had to carry out sort of long-term field work, and that took me back to Estonia. And there I lived in rural, sort of peripheral rural villages, which were targeted by a British-funded development program, and that aimed to develop communal life. And that was in the beginning of 2000s. So it was just about 10 years after the Soviet collapse, after the very sort of rapidly neoliberalizing processes had started to shape the Estonian society more generally, and into that kind of a setting where people had often lost their jobs. The villages had become very fragmented in terms of people's relations. This development program came with its plans and ideas. And it turned out that people were not that willing to go along with some of these new ideas about how to come together, how to solve your own problems, how to relate to other villagers in order to figure out how to either diminish poverty or replace some kind of institutions that had disappeared, and so on and so forth. So people didn't want to come together because of this post-Soviet reality and this sort of fragmentation, and also the new classes that had started to develop had made it very difficult for people to relate to each other as they used to. So this was something they really struggled with, and instead of feeling they can connect to others, they wanted to actually keep away. They didn't feel comfortable to come together with others in order to kind of reveal their own social situation as well. So it really didn't work that well at all, despite the sort of development program's hopes that it would. These arenas of communal togetherness actually turned out to be kind of arenas of rift and exposure. And in many ways, the development program didn't really work out at all. But interestingly, which I also found very, very fascinating as an anthropologist, or at that time, anthropologist of development, how the development program managed to nevertheless paint it as if everything was fine, hide the issues that it faced, and present often the locals as the reason for any failures. So this is kind of, again, a classic way for these development institutions to operate and to come out as very successful. So that was all these kinds of different aspects that I was looking at. I was living in the villages, and I was also going to the program events and the events where the program and the villagers came together. So this kind of an interest in institutions and communities and development has actually persisted through my career. But also because Estonia is such a small country, especially in the beginning of my career, there were very few anthropologists. There were lots of different topics to cover. So I've studied also migration. I did my postdoctoral research. The postdoctoral research was taking place in the UK again, and I was looking at Estonian migrants in the UK. I have been studying a particular heritage region on the border with Russia in Estonia, which has received considerable funds actually for maintaining and developing their cultural heritage. And that partly comes at the expense of the population that is not interested in making this local cultural heritage as a part of their everyday life. So we have this sort of elite, local cultural elite, so to speak, who receives funds from different national institutions, and then the rest of the population who doesn't feel that they are supported or valued. So I've been interested in that, and also how that has played out over a longer period of time. So I've been looking at them since the beginning of 2000s. But more recently, since about 2015, I can see how these groups who have been kind of left out of these institutional settings, how they are increasingly targeted by populists. So that's been something that I have been paying attention to more and more. And in this context, I've been now looking also at the conspiracy theories that have emerged since COVID and increasingly since Ukrainian war. And my particular angle has been how this has all played out in the context of the green turn. So we have the green turn in Estonia, where there's a lot of effort to, for instance, establish wind farms or other similar developments, and how people are who come to this discussion about whether to establish a wind farm, how they come from that kind of conspiracy theory laden atmosphere, and then explain why there shouldn't be these wind farms. Not only because there is an issue, this is an issue for a local environment, for instance, which definitely is the case, but they are often explaining it in ways which the rest of the society finds very problematic. So they are often labeled not just conspiracy theorists, but stupid, uneducated, and that's again something which I find fascinating. How do we kind of label certain parts of society in these ways? So that's another layer, and also I've been studying climate activism. But maybe we can take this on again in some other questions. So that's roughly my career, not mentioning the different positions, but more kind of looking at the topics that I've gone through over the years.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, it was a very interesting journey, and one aspect that we already have some, after we interview some of the members of SHiFT Cost, seems that indeed the diverse background, it's more or each day more important to our research career, and we have several inviters, and everyone have a very, very diverse career, and obviously our invited today don't or follow the same pattern. So now a little bit in about the research challenges and some innovations. We want to ask you what should you consider to be some of the biggest challenges in sustainability, transformation, and climate resilience that young researchers should address today?
I suppose at this very moment, the challenge seems to be bringing people back, the attention back to climate issues. The attention span of the world seems to be generally fairly limited. And the question is, how do we keep pushing towards sustainability, towards the safer world, now that everybody's attention is instead on other issues such as the war or Trump or a host of other concerns, which are all very valid, just that behind these issues there is something far deeper and far more problematic, which we need to address at the same time, and we seem to have failed to address. But also there is so much to address as a scholar, so many different aspects to understand that to pick one of them maybe isn't fair. And I'm thinking, there are all these angles that people should be coming to these topics with. So if you were a historian, you could study how over the years how we have responded to climatic variation, but also how these climatic variations have been, or these responses to climatic variations have been contested by the society. How these contestations, how they reflect the era. I had a very interesting colleague who was studying, for instance, 17th century climate cooling, and how this in Estonia generated a sort of short period of climate activism, one could say, where the peasants were revolting against the new situation they were finding themselves in. A lot of the crops didn't grow, and they were their understanding was that it was caused actually by some sort of wrong practices and lack of respect for God, or lack of respect, for instance, for the local deities or the local pagan deities, so to speak. So there's all these interesting topics that could be picked out in order to reflect on the current situation, which might be very, very interesting and revealing. Or if you were a lawyer, there is so much to study. What kinds of different ways of what different legal efforts there have been to challenge fossil fuel industry, how these challenges work or how they fail, or different practices across the world, how these different efforts to achieve change through law, for instance, how they clash, how there is a pushback from the industry. I mean, in the UK, there's been very valuable legal challenges to fossil fuel industry, but also there has been a governmental pushback, and especially against activists. So there are different ways of making sure that the protests are not as effective as the activists would like them to be. So again, something very valuable to understand and to consider. And also perhaps for the younger people to try to find what avenues have we not tried yet? What else is there? What kind of avenues we have not taken up? We're all kind of trying to reach change, trying to generate change, and it seems that all the different ways of achieving this have been tried, but I'm sure that there's more, and searching for these new ways of achieving change is something that you will have to address as younger scholars. And also, I would definitely think that it's worth doing this through activism as well. I mean, to me, for instance, being an activist has been a very helpful angle to see issues in a new light. And I would definitely encourage being an activist, even though it might sound like this is somehow not objective. I would remind people that actually, as researchers, we're still all living in the same planet, and we should never try to become so objective that we're detached. We need to be part of processes, and activism is placing yourself within the context of properly addressing, properly trying to push towards change, rather than kind of sitting back and saying, no, I'm going to just sort of sit there and look how changes occur and study them. No, we need to learn how to study from the inside, so to speak, So I think that's one of the things to maybe to maybe encourage for the younger generation of scholars as well.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like change is a shared target that we all must aim to by being active and continue to look at different sides of the situation and aim of all of those little targets in each. And you also already hinted at your career development and the complex journey that led you to address green and sustainability issues. But at the moment, is there a recent or current project or finding that you're especially proud or enthusiastic about?
Yeah, I guess one of the things that I really have, it's one thing what I really have liked doing and what I have really liked studying, and the other thing is what I find perhaps the most important or valuable for the society. And the latter has been a project which was bringing together a very sort of large multidisciplinary group of scholars whose aim was to apply their own scholarship to develop materials for schools. So we were all bringing our own expertise. We had atmospheric physicists, we had climatologists, we had historians, we had artists, and we had social scientists like me, ecologists and so on. But we also had this sort of together, we were trying to develop these materials for very early on. So for school kids from the age of about 7 or even younger, up to 18, so to the end of school. And it was trying to introduce these different aspects of climate topics. So each of us was finding the best, the most engaging ways of teaching about, starting from climate physics to begin with, or climate chemistry to begin with, all the way to the societal dimensions of climate change. So my own teaching materials were on climate justice. So I was trying to find engaging games and ways to explain to sort of 13, 14, 15-year-olds what is climate justice, how do we understand it. We developed a very sort of funny game which the kids really liked and took on. So that's probably something where I really feel that I have been part of creating real change. So maybe I leave it at that.
Thank you very much. If you allow us, we would like to focus now on your experience at SHiFT. So how was working in an interdisciplinary environment like SHiFT Cost Action enhance your research capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I really, as I already hinted at, I really value interdisciplinary environments. I just find that they are offering such a different array of different angles to the same topic, which enriches it in so many ways. One single discipline would never be able to achieve that. It kind of exercises one's own mind in unexpected ways, suddenly coming face to face with very different methodology or very different theory. So I have led different publication projects with people from different institutions. One of the publication projects that I'm working on at the moment within SHiFT with Alexander Reves is especially interesting, I think, because of the mix of disciplines that these authors represent. I'm also working at Horizon Europe project, which is interdisciplinary, and engaging with these different theories and ideas is proving to be very, very exciting, and definitely has kind of expanded my own academic scope. And to specifically look at the what we've been doing within SHiFT, then the special issue that we've been working on is one of those examples. And it's also interesting and valuable, I hope, because of its extremely pertinent topic. So it's looking at climate change, but it's looking at it through the lens of agonistic theory. It's published in a journal called Conflict and Society, and we are considering many of the most current issues. So from Ukraine and Gaza conflict as well as sort of particular case materials that we ourselves are gathering or have gathered over the years. So my own article, well, actually, we were writing an introductory article together with Alexandra, and we are looking at this sort of more general theoretical approach to climate via this agonistic and consensus theory. But I'm also bringing in my own material, which is sort of looking at this green turn and how people in these peripheral rural areas, how they're fighting these wind parks, as I mentioned, but also how they have been recently fighting a NATO practice ground, which is sort of established near Russian border, and for which a lot of trees were cut down, and the kind of idyllic rural environment was tampered with. So yeah, that's something which I have found very interesting, to look at those topics that have been addressing anyway from a new angle, which is this agonistic approach, which I believe human geography has used more than anthropology, for instance.
Yeah, you anticipated most of the next question, because I was going to ask, is there a particular initiative within the SHiFT Cost Action that you think impacted your research or career development?
Yeah, so that's something which I think is the most recent example of that. I do think there is a lot of scope or hope there that I could bring this into my other research as well. So potentially this could be something that takes me to new places in some ways. But I guess just being part of SHiFT has it's definitely introduced me to theories and people I would never otherwise have come across, and it has offered opportunities to organize events or calls, which is always a valuable practice ground to be able to do that. So that's been a great experience, and just again, coming across disciplines that I would not work with, and also because the example I was offering you before on this sort of climate materials, this was in Estonia. Now it's the kind of disciplinary landscape with different disciplines coming in, but it's now international. So that's also a valuable sort of additional layer.
Yes, seems very interesting. So, looking ahead, what career opportunities do you see emerging in the field of sustainability, transformation, and climate resilience? For instance, for young researchers as me, or even to Sylvia.
Yeah, I think even with the pushback that we can see at the moment globally from climate deniers, I think these opportunities will only increase. We will need people who understand fully the consequences of unsustainable, economic systems, and who can map out, ways of exiting these systems. Perhaps at first sort of working towards circular economy, but also towards a sort of change degrowth economy. So all of these aspects are potentially something to actually consider to build your career around. We need people who are not kind of tied to neoliberal ideologies, and who are able to think outside the sort of capitalist growth oriented box which we are in at the moment, and which a lot of the thinking circles around, and which tends to kind of make it impossible almost to go to certain places or certain ideas, because they are seen to be unsuitable within that kind of logic. So I would definitely believe that that moving, searching for these alternative ways of understanding the world is really the future. So yeah, we need people who are able to imagine a different future, and to also to detail the risks that are hidden in these different scenarios that could be unfolding as we go without change. but also, what kinds of changes trigger what types of scenarios and outcomes. So that's one sort of set of things to keep in mind. And sadly, I do believe that we need more specialists who are able to study and understand and mitigate also disasters. So disaster reduction specialists, I suppose, especially in disaster prone regions. And we also need people who who are able to take on kind of systems thinking. So most importantly, people who are able to comprehend systems of power and influence. So I think people do have a considerable urge to understand what is the bigger picture. But unfortunately, they are presently connecting the dots in a very uninformed and conspiracy-led way. So young scholars' new careers could be emerging in this sort of new ways of communicating science, linking it to all of these power-related topics to show why we are where we are and how to move on from here. And anthropology in many ways is an example of this very systems-centered thinking, even if we haven't been using systems thinking. But I do think that that this is definitely one of those disciplines which is more holistic and capable of showing all of these different layers of topics and influences behind the way that society functions. So I think anthropologists have certainly a very bright future ahead. But yeah, so that's the kind of dimensions that I consider to be related to future in particular important.
So also from what I understand, your advice to young researchers would be to work on the communication and awareness of the situation to avoid the creation of new conspiracies. And if you have any other advice which you could think could be useful to our researchers.
Yeah, communications is important. Awareness is very important. But I was writing an article with a couple of colleagues on how people in higher education, how aware and climate sort of concerned they are. And they're very aware. They're much better informed than people who are less educated. But when we were then looking at how these highly educated people, how their own climate footprint looks like, then it's much bigger than the footprint of the people who are less educated, less aware, but their behavior is led by less money, whereas the behavior of highly educated people is often led by the fact that they often earn a little more, and they are not spending these earnings in ways which is more climate conscious, I suppose. So the leap from awareness to behavior is something which is actually very important to keep in mind, and not to assume that if people are aware, the problem is solved. Unfortunately, there is still a lot more to do from, actually getting those who are entirely aware to start behaving differently and to take on that responsibility. Of course, it's not the individuals only, it's much bigger picture, but the individual's responsibility is also in changing the system, which is forcing us to behave in the way that we do. So yeah, so I think that's also something to consider. I also think that we need to think how to practically function. So yes, do all of these theoretical things, but also learn to grow your own food, learn to mend your clothes, learn to function outside of the system in a way, practice it. It's great to theoretically be aware of stuff, but apply it, apply it by doing it yourself every day, and apply it by teaching it to others. So I think that's something which is important too. But maybe this is all a little bit kind of unusual and not very academic way of approaching it. If you want more kind of academic advice in that sense, I think it's also valuable, and that relates to the practical dimension. Find internships already when you're a young scholar. Try to find internships in, I don't know, sustainability think tanks or NGOs or government agencies. Keeping in mind that that this could lead to a career, But also these are, chances for you to learn, but also chances for you to influence. So, I was myself a very young scholar entering universities. I started teaching at the university when I was 22. And because of my age, perhaps, I had a very sort of free view of the academic structure, for instance. I felt very free to challenge my superiors because I came in with ideas that really this was in the 90s, and my superiors, all of them, they seemed very, how to say it, they seemed very stuck in the old ways, and I was more than confident, I suppose, to kind of kick some doors open and say, I don't like what you're doing. This is where you're going wrong. So use that sort of youthful obnoxiousness, I suppose, to challenge the existing systems. I understand it's very difficult, and if you are building a career in a society where these hierarchies are very important, this might not be a very good advice. But if you can, then try to shape the systems within which you are living. That's also one of our responsibilities, I believe.
Thank you very much for this very important advices. We are arriving to the end of our episode of today. So I want to ask you if you have some final remark that you want to leave to us before we close.
Yeah, I think the main thing is, young scholars have their eyes wide open and their mind towards the future more than perhaps people who have made their career already. And they matter. I mean, your opinions, your directions are hugely important. And also your influence on other people. I mean, I was brought to understand climate issues in the mid-90s by just one person who was learning ecology and shared her ideas with me, or her knowledge with me, and that was enough to set me off on a basically a lifelong journey of climate awareness. And I have, as a result, influenced others directly by talking to them, but also indirectly via my teaching and writing. And for instance, I believe it is very important to also engage with the media. So learn to maybe write well and enter the media and share your ideas. So for instance, this has helped me to probably share my ideas to thousands, maybe tens of thousands of people. But in the end, I mean, this kind of having integrity, knowing that what you're doing is important, that you're not doing it just because of a salary or a position, but because you believe this is right. And this kind of integrity and passion and keen interest in your subject will change the world. That's what I think is crucial to believe in.
Well, thank you. I completely agree with every word you say. That leads us to the conclusion of this episode. So a big thank you to Aet Annist for sharing these valuable insights with us. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in to the SHiFT YRC podcast. We hope you're living with new insights, inspiration, and maybe even a spark for your next project. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share it with your network, and keep an eye out for more episodes. Stay curious, stay connected, and we'll see you next time.